Hey there, my name is Mike Blight. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am a former academic that made the transition from academia into tech SaaS. And so this is a video that it has basically been a conversation. Just back up a second. I've had a number of conversations as an academic thinking about leaving academia. And then now, as somebody who has left academia with people who are on the fence or thinking about it. And so instead of just having multiple of these conversations, I'm still willing to. Please reach out if you just want to chat one-on-one. I thought it might be helpful to give you some high-level summary takeaways as to here are some tips and tricks and insights of making that jump and to make it as seamless as possible. And what I would also mention is that this is very anecdotal evidence. This is vetted mostly by other academics that I've talked to, but certainly sample size of one, what worked for me, and also my pitfalls too. So I wouldn't take everything that I say as gospel. I would add the asterisk as to it worked for me, it might not work for you. And most of this is extemporaneous. I have some notes here. I have a couple bullet points that I'll use as time markers if you want to jump around to something that's the most applicable to you. So without further ado, who I am, I'm Mike. Let's check that off the list. I am a former academic who had a PhD in communication and technology. I was a non-tenure track faculty member. I was an adjunct faculty member for a number of years, transitioned into a non-tenure track faculty role with a huge course load, and then eventually taught as a tenure track faculty member for 3 years at a private liberal arts college. And so my specialty was communication and technology, which is my PhD. I worked as a faculty advisor for a public relations club. I taught public relations coursework. I'm a mixed methods researcher. And so I always struggle now with like, am I still a mixed methods researcher? Do I identify as that? And I think so my skills align with that, certainly. And so my transition from higher ed to tech SaaS, in a lot of ways was a byproduct of having a desirable skill set that I was able to parlay into my specific role now as the senior market research and insights manager at Sprout Social. My big thought, if you're just going to watch up to this moment, I thought I'd give you the big bang for your buck from the beginning, in that your biggest challenge is going to be identifying and articulating the skills that you have, most certainly in a non-academic way. So in academia, we have research and teaching and service and these usually clear-cut buckets as to where our skills and our time is invested and how those are allocated. If you're at a big public institution versus a private institution, those buckets have varying sizes and qualifications with it. One of my big takeaways for all of you is just to identify what is the actual input and output that you can provide. So if you're a qualitative researcher, how do you go about collecting data? How do you analyze data? What is the output and how does it benefit a party? So if we're talking about tech, how might it benefit somebody as a user experience researcher or a user experience designer and things like that? And I'll give a breakdown as to instructional design and UX research, which are the two areas that I sort of hedged. So skills, certainly identifying what you can do, what it looks like in a very tangible way. And then I have a horse in the race as a communication faculty member, former faculty member, but I think communicating those outputs is really important. How do you articulate the value that you add? How do you iterate on some of the decisions that you made? And so being able to communicate those skills both in application materials, which I'll get to in a second, but also just in general conversations that you have as part of the interviewing process. If you're selected for a first round interview with a recruiter or second round with the hiring manager, just being able to talk and communicate through those is exceptionally important. So that's skills. What I would say is don't sleep on LinkedIn certifications or Coursera or any other Code Academy, any other certificates that you can have to present on your LinkedIn portfolio and your profile. To add to your resume, to use as a talking point within your cover letter itself. You have more than likely, if you're making that transition, you've never worked in tech and you've never worked in SaaS, you likely have a number of skill and knowledge gaps. That's the reality. The sooner that you come to grips, this is my experience, the sooner you come to grips with that, the easier it is to be able to talk about it and explain how you can bridge those gaps. So if you've never worked with a developer before, or you've never worked with a brand creative team that makes data visualizations look exceptionally beautiful, like I have the pleasure of working with, you are going to have to figure out how your experiences are going to allow you to develop and build skills that you have a plan in mind. So certificates are certainly the way to go, just to bolster up and acknowledge, hey, I have these deficits. Literally everybody does in every industry. Here's my plan. Here's what I've been doing to shore up that weakness. And I think that speaks volumes, certainly some of your personal credentials as well. And the last bit is your portfolio. And I'll talk about this more both with instructional design and then also UX research. But your portfolio right now likely is a whole bunch of artifacts that are significant to academia and mostly less than ideal. I'm not going to use the word worthless because I don't want to be demeaning, but not as valuable or transferable to other industries, right? So you might have a book chapter that you wrote or a beautiful research article that was published in a top tier journal. All of that is great for a specific context, but more than likely it doesn't transfer as well as you would hope, which means that you have to do the legwork to be able to build and establish a portfolio that is applicable to the job that you're applying for or the industry or the type of field. That's not to say that you have to ditch all that stuff. You can talk about how great of a researcher you are. You can talk about the depth of your quantitative analysis skills when it comes to you being able to do a regression or an ANOVA within SPSS, and maybe you develop another skill set. But for the most part, you have to make it as specific and tailored to that role or industry as possible. This is mostly extemporaneous, so check that off the list. I'll talk about two different industries that I hedged my bets on because I thought they aligned well with the skill sets that I possessed. And the first one is instructional design. I think a lot of academics have this conflated sense that you teach, you lesson plan, you deal with assessment, you dole out grades, and so you would be a great instructional designer. And I will say that that is certainly true in terms of foundational pedagogical skills and knowledge. You know how to design and assess certain modules. Extra kudos with the hybrid and remote workplace if you've done online teaching. But instructional design, admittedly so now, looking back on it and going through the process of learning truly what an instructional designer is way harder than I thought it was going to be. And I don't know if that's arrogance on my end, but being 100% transparent, the skill set is so much more robust and complex. And again, this speaks to the value of LinkedIn, but that was one of the things that I started to do from the beginning is work through a LinkedIn course on Articulate Rise, which is one of the industry standard tools for developing some instructional design materials. So because I didn't have that skill set, I had never worked with Articulate before, I, number one, went out on LinkedIn, completed a certificate. That was pretty cool. Gave me some foundational knowledge, a little banner for my LinkedIn profile. But then more than that, I created an Articulate Rise project that was welcome to Mike Blight. And it was very self-servedly, what are all the different ways that I could create modules? How can I create different learning outcomes and objectives and even assess that at the end of it? So I literally made it a welcome to who I am. Here's my background. Here's a little bit about me personally. Here's my family. Here's my work experience. Here's why I'm really into instructional design. And then I had an assessment at the end. And that was a fun conversation point in interviews wherein people would say, I only got a 4 out of 5 on the end quiz. I feel like I don't even know you, right? So it was a little bit of banter. But more than anything else, I lacked the portfolio. I had teaching evaluations that said I was a great instructor. I had a teaching award, but very specific industry knowledge I lacked. And so the best way to build it up was, in my experience, in my opinion, to earn the certificate, create a course. I used just the free demo. It took me, I couldn't even budget out the time, maybe 10 hours all in for 2 of those things. And I used that as a hyperlink on my resume, in my cover letters. I put that on my LinkedIn as I was applying for jobs so that people had ease of access. I talked about it robustly. I called out my weakness. And that was a strength that I built upon a weakness. And I found pretty great success. I was offered a job as an instructional designer, making more than what I had made as an academic at any point of my career. And I actually turned it down for a other role, which I will talk about now. Instructional design, done. User experience. So I thought mixed methods researcher, I can marry quantitative and qualitative skills. And I think that is a good use case. You can certainly have one or both, but you certainly need one. So I am not the most profound quantitative researcher, nor am I the most profound qualitative researcher, but I'm above average at both of those. And so I thought that was a nice marriage of the two. And I did basically, if you just watched the instructional design bit, I did the same thing. I had familiarity. I'd been using SPSS for a decade. I learned RStudio. Python's also a great option. I took a LinkedIn certificate course to tout that I had been developing this in-demand skill set in using RStudio. And more than RStudio, I had also conducted a usability test. So one of the things that I would recommend is looking at specific industries, specific roles, seeing what the desired qualifications are, and then trying to reverse engineer that. So I noticed usability test was talked about quite a bit. And so what I ended up doing is I conducted my own usability test. Very meta. In the instructional design bit, I made a Articulate Rise course about who Mike Blight is. And then in the case of UX, I connected usability study on LinkedIn's job search function. I was literally using it every single day, multiple times a day. Once the kids went down to bed, that's the first thing I launched on my browser. And so I recruited a bunch of people. I put out on LinkedIn, hey, is anybody looking for a job? And using LinkedIn's job search function, just DM me. You don't have to out yourself in a public comment. And I conducted about 30 minutes with these people. They shared their screen. I had this full usability script ready. I had tasks for them to perform. All this for the record, that usability study knowledge was just born out of reading blog articles, watching YouTube videos, and LinkedIn. So I learned how to do it. I had done interviews before and I'd conducted focus groups as an academic. But again, very specific use case, specific skill set. And the audience that the output is for this usability test for a UX researcher role was specifically for the LinkedIn team, right? And so that was the guiding star the whole time. How do I develop a usability test to relay information back to, in this case, the fake practitioner of LinkedIn? And then from there, how do I iterate on that? So I recruited about 8 people. We had 30 minutes of them sharing their screen. I had them perform certain tasks. I compiled all the data, I analyzed it, I put it into a PDF report. So that's the portfolio building. But after I put it into the PDF report, I had actually solicited some of my friends who are designers and developers to provide feedback on it. And I offered them like coffee, or I mean, nobody actually took it up. They were just friends. So, you know, a benefit of just having to know people in the industry. And I said, hey, let's pretend that you're on this team and I just presented you this information. Here's the deck that I built. What's the feedback that you have? What am I missing that would be really valuable for you to do your job? Like what didn't I actually articulate? What do I need to add more detail on? And there were 3 people that I asked. All 3 of them gave me extensive notes, which was humbling. And then I iterated. And what I did in particular is that when I shared my portfolio, I actually shared 2 versions of the slide deck and the report. The first one was sans any feedback. It was the one that I sent to my friends. And the second one was the changes that I made based on the feedback. And I had kind of this third complimentary document that was, here's like a punch list of all the feedback that was given to me for each section. So if somebody was looking at version 1 versus version 2, they could see why changes were made. And then the last thing that I did to build out that portfolio is I did a video just like this with a shared screen, and recorded it and uploaded it to the cloud. And I just went through and presented it as though I was presenting it. It was like a 6-minute presentation, as though I was presenting it to the team. Like, here are my findings. Here's what we learned. Here's how we move forward. So all of that is to say, there's a lot of ownership that you can play into building out that portfolio and making the psychological leap from, hey, you're an academic, to, hey, you want to work in this industry, but you don't have all the skills. You don't have the known commodities and knowledge. You haven't worked with a product team. You have no idea how to communicate this to an engineer. I made it my point to say, you're right. I'm not going to refute that. You're absolutely right. I have the skills. I really tested them and refined them. I built them up. I created these portfolio pieces, independent instructional design, UX research, and here is what you can expect from me. So I took as much guesswork as possible. They didn't have to guess what it would look like when I made a usability test. I went out and I did that thing. And I think that ultimately, just based on feedback that I received, offers that I received, just as part of the interview process, was one of the biggest takeaways that I had. Was people were genuinely impressed, not necessarily by like the quality of the work per se, because now again, in hindsight, a year removed from this whole fiasco, I think that's more negative than I thought. But throughout this process, I learned that people were far more intrigued and impressed by my willingness to put in all that extra effort to build a portfolio, to explain how my exact skills matched up. I didn't just say, hey, I've done focus groups and qualitative, research methodology. It was, hey, I've done this as an academic. I really wanted to showcase to you all, employer, that I had the capacity to do it within your specific role. You said usability tests. Here's a usability test that I conducted. And then I made that. That was basically 50% of my cover letter, was articulating that process, talking about how, the lessons that I learned. Here are some of the other skills. And this is how I think that my approach, my philosophy, my skill set development as an academic, here's what I learned as a PhD. Here's how all this trends toward I would be a good hire. Certainly there's a learning curve. There's a learning curve with everything, but I have a lot more initiative than a lot of other people who are applying for this position. And so, what you think, right? And then I was going to be at the mercy anyway of the hiring manager and the team. So those are my suggestions for all of you, and all of that is really just boiled down to highlight your skills, figure out how they're transferable, earn some certificates, and build your portfolio, and take the guesswork out of the application process. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you actually made it this far in the video, feel free to DM me, comment on this video itself, say, hey, Mike, I watched your video. I still have some questions. My exact transfer of skills isn't just like yours. What should I do? I am genuinely so happy to have one-on-one with you. We could set up a virtual coffee for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I'll look at your resume, I'll look at your cover letter, and we can make that happen. So I hope you're doing well. Hope you're not too frustrated by the application process, and talk to you soon.